Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's instalment of Sinn Féin in Conversation. I am joined tonight by John Douglas, who is a lifelong trade unionist and the General Secretary of the Man Trade Union. John, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
I want to, first of all, John, send out on Sinn Féin's behalf our solidarity with all of those frontline workers, obviously those in health, but also those in retail, John, and many of your trade union members who are going to work every day. I want to send solidarity greetings to those people. I also want to wish all of those who are sick best wishes, those who have contracted the virus, over 10,000 people and more, and also to extend our sympathies to the families of all those who've been bereaved and who've lost loved ones at this time as well. So I want to send our greetings to all of those individuals. I also want to send best wishes to Mary Lou MacDonald. It was confirmed yesterday that she had contracted the virus and she has been sick for the last number of weeks. She's doing very well. She will be back to work next week, and we want to send our best wishes to her and her family as well. John, to get a sense from you, as a lifelong trade unionist and someone who represents ordinary working people, what's it like for your members at this point in time in the real world out there in these changed circumstances? What's it like for you, I suppose, as the leader of the trade union, and also what's it like for your trade union officials in terms of how they can best represent your members at this time? So can you give us a glimpse of what it's like, especially for your members, those who've lost their jobs and those who are still going to work?
Yeah, well, first of all, David, thanks for having me on, and I'd like to be associated with your opening remarks, I think, right across the board. Listen, it's horrendous out there for our members. We have tens of thousands of members who have been temporarily laid off and who are depending either on the wage subsidy scheme or depending on the 350 COVID payment. Their jobs have been deemed as non-essential, so they're in non-food or pharmacy retailing, and they're sitting at home not knowing when they're going back to work. Some of them wondering, will they go back to work at all? And wondering on what terms and conditions they'll go back to work. So it's extremely stressful. They're very, very worried. They're keeping in contact with their union, and we're keeping in contact with them and their employers. But it is extremely stressful for them. And then of course, we have tens of thousands of members who are working in the food retailing and in the pharmacy sector right across the country, who go every day to work, many of them by public transport, putting their own health at risk, serving customers on a daily basis under very difficult circumstances in an environment which is not normal, where, sometimes it brings out the worst in people. It also brings out the best of people, as we know, and the vast majority of people. But there's the frustrations of the general public sometimes spill over in the shop floor, and our members on the front line have to deal with that as well. So it's very, very difficult for them. And then to add to that, then we just had the devastating word that 2,000 workers who are already on temporary layoff in Debenhams have been told that their jobs won't be there, that the shops won't be reopening at the end of the COVID crisis. We believe that's cynical. We believe that the time is not by accident. We believe that it hampers workers' ability to mobilise, and that was something which was well thought out by the owners of the company. And we're calling on the company to step back and to withdraw their intention to appoint a liquidator. So it's extremely difficult out there in retail at the moment. It's a changing landscape on a daily basis. The restrictions are hitting our members badly. The people who are not working are trying to survive on a meagre income. The people who are working under very, very, very difficult circumstances.
Yes, Sean, and I suppose, is it true to say that about 50% of your members and more have either lost their jobs on a temporary or permanent basis? Mm-hmm. And for those who have lost their jobs on a permanent basis, in what areas? You've given the example of Debenhams, and I've been contacted myself by a number of those workers, and they're very angry again at how the news was communicated, how a decision was made. There's a fear as well that the company was using this COVID-19 crisis to, I suppose, fast track a liquidation. So there's a real concern. So what supports have you got from government? What engagement have you had with the company, and what supports are put in place to protect those workers in the company at this time?
Well, I suppose the majority of our members who've been laid off across the retail sector, in the non-food sector, in the bar sector, hopefully they'll be re-employed on the same terms and conditions of employment, and that hopefully that won't have to wait too much longer for that. But Debenhams is a particular case where a company which was somewhat struggling over the last number of years has seized the opportunity quite cynically to announce that it was going into administration in the UK with its 142 stores, but that it had no future for the Irish business and it was cutting the Irish business adrift. Now, it did so in the certain knowledge that its 2,000 workers in the Irish Republic were already on lockdown, were already restricted in terms of their travel, were already restricted in terms of their communications, who were already restricted in terms of their income. But to cynically announce that these stores would not be reopened, that a liquidator would be appointed, at a time when workers can't engage in a normal sense, can't engage with a trade union either by going to general meetings, can't have protests, can't mobilise, can't engage with the company across the table. It was cynical, it was well planned, the timing of it, and it brings all the worst things to mind, that a company at the peak of a national crisis could be so cynical to do something to 2,000 long-serving workers. Many of those workers have over 30 years service. Many of those workers have served this company loyally. And to do that to them, to be that opportunistic, is despicable. And we're calling on government to intervene. We're calling on all the political parties, including Sinn Féin, to make contact with the owners of the company, who, by the way, Bank of Ireland are a part owner of this company. They're part of the ownership structure of this company. And they must have been part of that decision to make this cynical announcement during this time of national crisis. And we're calling on the government and all political parties to roundly demand that the liquidator is withdrawn, that there's no liquidator appointed, and this company sees this COVID crisis through. And then at the end of that crisis, that they engage with the trade union movement and the shop stewards to come up with the best deal possible in terms of saving jobs or the best package possible for our members.
Thanks, John. And Sinn Féin has been in contact with the company, but also we've been here before with Cleary's workers. And I suppose the question is, as we emerge out of this crisis, how do we better protect workers in these times as well? So we've seen this far too many times before, workers left high and dry. The state has to pick up the tab as well through the Social Insurance Fund, companies walking away from their responsibilities, treating the workers very shabbily. So a number of questions, John, that have come in that I just want to take at this point if I can. Jason asks, I work on the minimum wage. My employer has opted for the wage subsidy scheme. I'm getting €100 less than many of my friends who were on the Covid-19 payment or the pandemic unemployment payment, and he finds this very unfair. Elaine works in Debenhams and she says she lost her job. She's absolutely gutted. I have bills to pay and I'm worried about my future. What are my entitlements? So I suppose she's asking, what is the trade union doing and what can be done to protect her, and what can government do at this point as well? And Jerry on Twitter wants to know if there's any info or progress on the COVID-19 payment being made to workers who live in the 6 counties who are not entitled to that payment at this point in time. So, John, can you take those questions in relation to Debenhams and also the All-Ireland question in relation to the pandemic unemployment payment for those who work in the south but live in the north? Yeah, sure, David. I'll take the last one first because I think it's a very important question. We have a lot of members who work across the kind of retail sector across the border. So they on this side of the border, but would travel then from Newry or from Derry to work in the retail sector in Donegal or indeed in Dundalk from Newry. And it now appears that even though those workers work down here, they pay all their taxes, they pay the universal social charge, they pay everything that's due. When it comes to a crisis, suddenly they are dispendable and they're told you have no entitlement whatsoever, even though you've paid all your social welfare, all your taxes. When it comes to the crunch, this government is going to abandon you. And that's what's happened. And that's decidedly unfair for these workers. And it has to be dealt with. There's thousands of these workers, many of them working on building sites, not only in retail, working in offices, driving up and down the M1 every day of the week to offices in Dublin, the outskirts of Dublin, and in retail in Dundalk and in Monaghan, Cavan and in Sligo and all those counties. So, I mean, to simply write those workers off is not fair. We have been lobbying through the Irish Congress of Trade Unions with government to say, listen, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We're all in this together. It's an all-Ireland crisis. And, if 350 is good enough for a worker who works in Newry, who works in Dundalk, beside a worker from Newry, then both should get the 350. There should be no discrimination. This is just pure discrimination.
And there's no base.
Absolutely, John. I think it's important as well to point out that the all-island economy has to work for everybody. It has to work, obviously, for businesses, but also has to work for workers. And obviously, this is seen as a very, very unfair situation for those workers. I just want to answer Jason's question as well that he posed in relation to anomalies in the wage subsidy scheme. It is correct that those on the minimum wage and those on low pay are losing out. They would get more if they were on the pandemic unemployment payment. We have been in contact with Revenue through Pierce Doherty. We've been in contact with the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Social Protection. We have asked that wage subsidy scheme have a floor of €350 to protect those on the minimum wage and on low pay. And we previously proposed a wage subsidy scheme of €520 a week to ensure that there was, I suppose, basic income protections for all of those workers who have lost their jobs at this point. And also, John, can you talk a bit about what other supports need to be put in place so people who've lost their jobs and are getting very low income support will be worried about debt, bills at the end of all of this, whether it's rent bills or phone bills or electricity bills and so on. So what other supports need to be put in place at this point in time for those people who've lost their jobs?
I think there's a whole suite of measures. There's a whole suite of measures around debt forgiveness in terms of, utility bills. They need to be put on hold. So your ESB bill, your rent bills, all those bills need to be put to one side. There's no way that workers on 350 and some of them on less, some of them on 203, and indeed less than that, can afford to be paying ESB bills, to be paying rents, to be paying mortgages, to be paying back loans, bank debts, car loans, etc. There needs to be a general moratorium on all debt and all repayments. And that goes right across the board, from utility bills right across the board to mortgage payments. And that's the only way we're going to get out of this. That workers need to have, our families need to have money in their pockets to spend back in the local economy again, to generate economic activity in the local villages and the local towns around Ireland. That we can get people back into the shops, we can get people back into the restaurants, back into the pubs, back spending money again, back circulating money again. Taking money out to pay debt off is just dead money. It goes nowhere, it goes into a hole. And it doesn't create any jobs. And I think the government needs to step in now and to say, listen, there is a moratorium on all debt, be it a mortgage, be it rent, be it bank loans. We are freezing all debt at the moment. And I think that has to happen. It has to happen fairly quickly, because whatever savings people have, and people have very little savings. Most of my members live from wage packet to wage packet. And, miss one wage packet and you're in trouble. So at the end of the day, I think this needs to be acted on as a matter of urgency to keep people's heads above water. And that's all we're doing, is keeping people's heads above water. In terms of the Debenhams question you were asking, I know that did mention the Debenhams, and you've had some people on from your local constituency, the Debenhams store in Waterford. We will be starting a campaign. We're starting today. We have written to all the political parties. We've written to the minister involved. But we're also asking our members to start contacting the local TDs, to start putting pressure on the local TDs. There's a government in the air somewhere. Whether it ever happens or not, I don't know. But at this point in time, we need to put pressure on the political establishment, those who have the levers of power at the moment. We need to put pressure on them to tell Debenhams, to tell the owners of Debenhams in the UK, it's not okay to rubbish and to do away with 2,000 Irish jobs at the drop of a hat in the middle of a national crisis. It's not acceptable. It won't be acceptable. And if you do it, there will be a penalty and there will be repercussions on that company to do that. And that's the only way to get a message across. And we need a government that stands up for workers. We need a government that stands up for workers' rights. We need a government that can draw the line and say, listen, it's not all about the economy. It's about society. It's about what sort of society, what sort of a society we want in the future. And that's what
and John, that raises a number of questions, because we proposed in the past collective bargaining rights, for example, in the Dáil, right to be heard, right to access, and also stronger protections for workers in terms of bills that we proposed, all voted down by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And if you go back to the last economic crash, the bailout was for the banks. The bailout was for developers and for the vested interests and for the elites. And one of the lessons that should have been learned is that we have to bail out ordinary workers and families. And we're not seeing that. And again, we have a disgraceful situation where this company is behaving in the way that it does. So how important is it that we build on those rights as we emerge out of those crises, and that we learn the lessons of the past, that we can't continue on? And you mentioned the banks earlier. We can see the disgraceful behaviour of some banks charging interest on interest, charging people for their bank transactions at this time as well, and all of that needs to be challenged. And what we need is a government that can stand up for ordinary workers and families.
We need to build a fair society. And at the end of the day, I mean, our members are the bin men and the bin women, the hotel staff, the restaurant staff, the cleaners, the retail workers. They can't be essential workers today and be disposable workers tomorrow. That we're not going back there. We're never going back there. If you're an essential worker today, you have to have decency, you have to have respect, you have to have a decent contract. You know, no more 0-hour contracts, no more low pay. It's not by accident that Ireland has the second highest rate of low pay in the OECD. That happened by a deliberate policy of successive governments, successive neoliberal governments such as Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, acting in cohort with the business community to make sure they drove down wages and conditions in Ireland, and to drive down trade union membership as well, because they wouldn't concede or wouldn't give workers the rights to form and join trade unions. Now, that was deliberate, and that was to keep wages low, and that was to keep workers in their place. Now, if you're an essential worker today, sweeping the floor or packing a shelf or collecting the rubbish, you're going to be essential tomorrow. And to be essential tomorrow, you need a decent contract, you need a voice at work, you need decent terms and conditions of employment, you need childcare, you need decent healthcare, and you need decent education. So all that package of measures has to be brought together. We're not going back to what was considered normal, but what's considered normal is really abnormal, and it's been proved to be abnormal that it doesn't work in a time of a crisis. What's the first thing they done was brought all the private hospitals into a public system, because the private healthcare system doesn't work at times of crisis, doesn't serve the people. So we're not going back that way. We can't go back that way. We need to move forward and create a decent, fair society for all its citizens, not for the minority.
Well, John, it wasn't so long ago that those essential workers, and they are essential workers, were treated shabbily by this government. So if you look at the nurses who were on strike and how they were treated by the government and by the HSE at the time, if you look at those issues that you raised in relation to precarious work and low pay, and the fact that the government dragged their feet on any changes to ensure that workers are protected. So I do think it's very, very important as we emerge out of this, there has to be a discussion about not going back to building an economy on low pay. We need to take the high road here, which is decent work, which is decent wages, making sure that in a real republic that people's rights are vindicated. And, you know, we've done a lot of work with your own union, John, on all of these issues in terms of low pay, banded hours and precarious work. And these are the same workers who the government parties are now saying are essential workers and praising them, and they should, and they deserve all of our praise. But they were very, very slow to put in place the supports in relation to those workers on low-hour contracts and zero-hour contracts, and being exploited by many of their employers at the time as well. So what needs to be done as we emerge out of this, and bear in mind that we took the low road following the last economic crash, and we had a Fine Gael government supported by Labour in the past as well, and others who built the economy and built the recovery on low paid jobs, and weren't too concerned or weren't too interested in building an economy on decent work and decent wages. So from your perspective, what needs to happen in the political sphere in the time ahead to build on those rights and to make sure that workers are properly protected as we emerge out of this crisis and during this crisis as well?
Well, there needs to be a new social contract. As far as I'm concerned, there needs to be a social contract which values work, which values all forms of work in terms of a decent wages and a decent contract. There needs to be strong legislation to protect workers' rights. There needs to be legislation to give workers a voice at work, the right to join a trade union. At the moment, you have a constitutional right to join a trade union, but you have no right to have that union act on your behalf. It's like joining a golf club and not being allowed to play golf. It's a nonsense. And the present political establishment have been aware of that for decades and have been dancing around it and giving us crumbs off the table and giving us little bits of this and little bits of that. In effect, giving us nothing really. Giving us nothing. They gave us a minimum wage, which is not even a living wage. They've given us a kind of a union recognition, which is not union. Which is not union recognition. They've given us banded hour contracts, which we had to fight for very, very hard. And your own party fought very, very hard and made some good improvements in relation to 0-hour contracts and banded hour contracts, and doing away with precarious type contracts. All that had to be fought for and won. But ultimately, what we really need is a progressive government here, which values work, which values family, which values society, which creates a just society for the 99%, not for the 1%, which has a broad tax base, which has a fair tax base, which doesn't allow millionaires to jet in and out of the country and pay no tax. right? Which doesn't create tax havens down in the financial services district, right? Which creates the resources that we can have state childcare, that we can have decent healthcare, that we can have decent schools, that we can have decent hospitals, that we need to create the resources. If anyone thinks, right, that we're not going to have decent resources and decent social services, right, without someone having to pay for it, they're living on cloud cuckoo land. But everyone should pay according to their means, not letting the rich, the wealthy off the hook for all the time and going back to the well and flogging the same group of people for more and more resources to put less and less into a social welfare system, which frankly, when push came to shove, it collapsed. So elder care collapsed, the nursing homes collapsed, childcare collapsed, the hospital system collapsed, all because they had been run into the ground over the last 50 years in the name of profit, in the name of siphoning off parts of our healthcare system, our elder care, our child care, so people can make profit out of it. And the profit motive does not work when it comes to social services. It has
Can you understand what all of this means for the trade union movement? Because obviously you would be concerned about those 50% of your workers who lost their jobs. A lot of hard work was put into building up membership in all of those companies and in those sectors. And I've been in touch with many, many workers who are not in trade unions, and they've been left high and dry. Many of them feel powerless. How important is it that we build a very strong trade union movement and a labour movement again in the time ahead? And it showed me, and it showed, I think, many people how important it is that people should be in a trade union. The collective bargaining and the voice of workers is very, very important. And on the issue of government formation, you will have seen that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are signing up to a framework document. Since the foundation of the state, we've had either a Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael government. In the last Dáil term, we saw the trick of confidence and supply. But I think people saw through it. And all of those issues that you raised, John, about childcare being an extension of primary care and affordable for families, about a healthcare system which is a single tier system where we truly value work there, that we can make sure that sick people can get treated quickly and free at the point of delivery, that we build our education system, that we invest in public services, that we have fair and just taxation, and that we don't hollow out the tax base but give tax breaks to the very wealthy, but that we actually tax wealth in a proper way and build the public services. And I suppose all of this, John, is about building a real republic, an all-island republic, but building a real republic where people have rights. So we just fought an election campaign that can't be forgotten. Sinn Féin has a strong mandate. We emerged as the largest party. We're seeing essentially a carve-up, I think, between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, a desperate attempt to cling on to power now at this point in time, and they will be looking for coalition partners. And we in Sinn Féin, as you know, we worked very hard reaching out to others of a like mind, the Social Democrats, the Greens, the Labour Party, People Before Profit, Solidarity, Independence and so on. What message would you have for those parties as Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael approach them in the time ahead? And given now that these parties are promising to deal with health and promising to deal with housing and promising to deal with all of these issues and attempting to steal Sinn Féin's clothes, which we don't mind if they deliver the policies, but we don't trust them. So what's your view on that in terms of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and that carve up, but also the approach that they will make to progressive parties in the time ahead?
Listen, they're on a fishing expedition and they're baiting their hook to see which party they'll reel in. And once they've reeled them in, they put them in the bag, and that'll be the end of that party. At the end of the day, a leopard doesn't change the spots. These two parties have been in power one way or the other for decades. And they are the root cause effect of our collapsing healthcare system, of our collapsing elder care system, of our collapsing childcare system, of precarious type jobs and low paid jobs, of an economy which favours the few rather than the many, which favours those who don't need over those who do need. So the real hope is a hope of change, a hope that we get a left-wing progressive government. And I think parties like Sinn Féin, People Before Profit, and other left-wing parties coming together to form, maybe at this stage, an effective opposition to hold the feet to the fire of two parties who have really no intention of doing anything. Normal to them is back to the way it was, is recreating the economy the way it was. They have no intention today or tomorrow of ever doing anything which deals with the issues that I've just mentioned, right? They are paying millions to the private healthcare sector to get a loan of their beds. They should have been nationalised and told to be nationalised. At the end of the day, these will just tinker on the edges and it'll be back to their normal. And the electorate who voted for change in the last election would be left high and dry. And we cannot allow them to grab this power at this time. We must stand up and say, listen, the electorate, the majority of the electorate voted for change. This is not change. And you can dress yourself up in the king's clothes. You can dress yourself up any way you like. But at the end of the day, this is not what the people want. And this is not what the people are going to accept. And if we have to go into opposition, right? The progressives in this country have to go into opposition. But then we go into opposition and we make sure that we hold them to account on everything they do. Because really, when you scratch the surface, they haven't changed one iota.
Well, there's also a narrative as well that is being presented by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that nobody will talk to Sinn Féin and nobody will enter government with Sinn Féin. That's not true, because if you look in the aftermath of the election, we spoke to the Labour Party, we spoke to the Green Party, we spoke to Social Democrats, we spoke to Solidarity, Rise, People Before Profit, we spoke to all of the independent groupings, and all of those said yes, they would go into government with Sinn Féin. What we have here are the two establishment parties who have carved up power between them since the foundation of the state, want to block change, and they want to ignore the mandate and the voters, and hundreds of thousands of people who came out to vote for Sinn Féin in the last election, and to say to them, your vote doesn't count. Our vote does count. And we have tried everything to go into government, but we have two parties who are refusing to talk to Sinn Féin because, in my view, they don't want to tackle those big issues. If they really wanted to deliver a single tier health service, they would talk to Sinn Féin. If they really wanted to deliver workers' rights and ensure that we took the high road, as I said earlier, we built an economy on decent work and decent pay, they would talk to Sinn Féin. If they wanted to address the housing crisis, and we saw with Fine Gael's so-called priority list, housing wasn't mentioned. Surprise, surprise, John. Workers' rights wasn't mentioned. Collective bargaining wasn't mentioned. Decent work and decent pay wasn't mentioned. So these parties, in my view, are more about clinging on to power at all costs, and less about the actual substance and the policies. I do want to put a number of questions at this point as well, John, more questions in, and some of them are relevant to yourself in terms of how to build a trade union movement and the experience of many people as well. Sorka says that retail workers have been shown to be key essential workers during this crisis. Surely it's now time to be giving a proper wage. Luke says, I don't want to be negative, but I know everybody is struggling. But when this is all over, we can't go back to the way things were. Lots of us will be drowning in debt. There has been lots of good support being put in place during this crisis, but surely more needs to be done. And he says he doesn't trust Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and government to do that. Roisin says that she's embarrassed to say that she never joined a trade union, but now she sees the value in it. And how does she go about joining a trade union? Does she? Is it involving meetings, attending meetings and so on? How does she join a trade union? And some practical questions as well. So can you just answer some of those, John, if you can?
Yeah, listen, the trade union movement is not perfect. There's 40 trade unions in Ireland, from public sector workers to private sector workers to reasonably paid jobs, to well-paid jobs, to very poorly paid jobs. So it's a strange mixture, and we always haven't got it right. In fact, sometimes I think we got it more wrong sometimes than we got right. But I remember during the Right to Water campaign when 5 or 6 trade unions mobilised, and their members mobilised behind them. And they mobilised in the local communities. And it wasn't just about pay. And it wasn't just about terms and conditions of employment. It was about water, but it wasn't just about water. It was about privatising water, right? It was fighting the privatisation and the profit motive in our natural resource of water. And people got it. And I think when the trade union movement acts in unison and acts with the community and acts with the people, and I think it's possible to create great change. And I think, as a result of this crisis, I think the trade union movement is going to have to reassess itself. It's going to have a deep, long, hard look at itself and say, listen, what are our key objectives for the next 5 to 10 years? What are we going to achieve? What are we going to fight for? What's important to our members? What's important to society general? And it is decent wages, and it is housing, and it is healthcare, and it is elder care, and it is childcare. and and a few more things as well thrown into it. But they are the essence of a decent society. And if we will have to mobilise around those issues, and we were going to have to take the lead in those issues. And I'm not talking about social partnership. I'm not talking about sitting at the big man's table and looking for crumbs. I'm talking about mobilising workers on the ground to actually join progressive political parties, to become active in political parties, to become active in the trade union, to fight for fairer conditions of employment, to fight for a voice at work, and to transform Ireland into a real republic, into a republic that our forefathers and the people who died for this would be proud of. And that's what we need to do. And I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of young workers who came out to vote in the last general election and voted for change. They got it. They understood what they were voting for, right? They went home to their villages and towns all around the country and voted on that Saturday. And they made a difference. And now what we have is two establishment parties who are trying to strangle the life out of the birth of a movement or the rebirth of a movement. And we can't allow that to happen. And it shouldn't happen in our watch. And it shouldn't happen on the trade unions watch. And it shouldn't happen with the progressive political party watch. We must mobilise to say, you are not elected. You have not a mandate to act on our behalf. Because we want change, and we want critical change, deep change that you will not deliver.
That's a very important call, John, and we have to stand up for workers, and we have to stand up for our rights in the time ahead, and the struggle for a better republic and a better society will continue. We won't be sidelined by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Our voters will not be sidelined or silenced. And unfortunately, the time is up, John, tonight. And I want to thank you for your contribution here tonight. And I also want to say that we have a huge amount of work to do over the next number of weeks, months and years. And the struggle to build a better society, to build that health service that you spoke about, a single tier health service, to make sure that workers have decent work and decent pay, for all parties to get behind your own trade union, but also the ICTU's plan for decent work and decent pay as well, to make sure that as we emerge out of this crisis, that we do have collective bargaining rights, that people have decent work and decent pay, that we have a government that actually builds the homes that people needs, that gives a break to renters, and essentially that we have a government that doesn't represent the elites and the vested interests, because that's really what annoys people, that they see that these two parties stand up and they represent the bankers and the landlords and the vulture funds and the speculators, and there's a bailout for all of those individuals, but there's no bailout for ordinary working people. And we want to build a united Ireland, we want to build a fair Ireland, and obviously that battle will continue in the time ahead. So listen, John, I want to thank you. There's been lots of questions which have come in through Facebook and through Twitter and through YouTube. We couldn't get to all of them tonight, but we do have a team of people that will go through all of those questions, and every single person who posed a question will get a formal response. So I want to end by wishing you well, John. Stay safe. I know you have a big job of work to do, and to all of our listeners to stay safe at this time. Thank you, and thank you, John.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.